Hello, listeners, and welcome to the latest episode of the AdQuick Advertising Podcast, a podcast that explores the intersection of technology, advertising, content, all of the things that you care about. Today, we have a special guest, Dr. Augustine Fou. He is the owner of Fou Analytics. They're a better analytics for your media company. You can see Fou yourself is the tagline. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Adam. Glad to be here.
Yeah. And so you are an industry luminary. You have been doing online marketing work since the 90s. You're a legend in the space. I've always admired your work and your commentary. So I'm super excited to have you here. But for our listeners who are maybe younger and new to the sector or just aren't as close to the, I would say, more in-depth and feisty conversations in the sector, can you give the quick overview as to your background and what you're up to now?
Sure. Happy to. Well, I've been doing digital marketing for going on 30 years. I came to New York to start at McKinsey and Company, so management consulting in the mid 90s, and quickly realized that the internet was going to basically change everything, change every single industry in ways that we couldn't even contemplate back then. And having written some articles about what the internet was, back then I remember web pages were still devoid of pictures. It was just text with a few words that were underlined, and those were called hyperlinks. So basically you could click around and move to different web pages, and then soon thereafter people added images and other things to it. So in the very beginning, that was really before advertising online took off. So kind of witnessed the entire arc of the evolution of digital marketing. I spent time at American Express in the digital marketing department, and then at two agency holding companies, IPG and Omnicom. And then in the last 12 years, got back to my own consulting, and that's where Fou Analytics came about. So we were kind of looking at the analytics of digital ads, just like you have analytics for your websites, but you really can't use GA for your ads, right? So that's the platform we built to start helping advertisers monitor their ads and have better analytics so they can actually see where their ads are going and whether the ads ended up on bad sites or whether bots were loading their ads and things like that. So that's like 30 years in 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's a super good overview. And so, you know, that one area I think is interesting is you are thoughtful, you're analytical, you're very kind too. And I think I've seen some controversy surrounding you. And I think this gets to the heart of something I was talking with someone else about earlier, that it kind of seems like the marketing sector doesn't want accountability. They don't really want people to maybe call out things that were done a certain way because of sometimes financial interests, sometimes just personal bias. And I see you tend to attract a certain type of person who's not very happy with you saying, well, maybe this should be done a different way, or maybe this is something worth auditing. And to me, I'm an old guard digital marketer as well. I've been doing online things not as long as you, but since the early 2000s. And I always like those conversations because I'm like, hey, this is something to explore. And it seems to me when you get some of the pushback, I feel like you might receive once in a while where someone's just trying to write you off. I feel like it's usually because there's some vested interest. Do you want to talk a little bit about the
Yeah,
controversies
yeah.
that you've had?
I think it's really, no one likes to get audited, right? No one likes to, others to look under the hood. But I'm a scientist by training, so I got my PhD from MIT in material science and chemical engineering. So I'm an experimentalist, right? I run research projects, I run experiments so that I can actually look at the data. And if I don't have the data, I can't make any claims, right? Without data is just an opinion. So bottom line is, I tend to look at the analytics and try to figure out if something actually worked, right? So when we first started talking about digital advertising, the concept that a lot of people had was that in digital you could measure everything, right? You had so much data that very often you don't have when you're doing TV advertising, right? So in TV advertising, you needed a third party like Nielsen to kind of approximate. right? How many ads were shown, what was the viewership, and all that kind of stuff. In digital, in theory, every single ad could be measured, every single click could be measured, every single page view could be measured. So what has happened is that we're generating enormous amounts of data, but there's not only errors in the data, but also errors in understanding the data. So as a scientist, it's like, these ads, this is a recent controversy. This one display ad impression did not drive this one purchase. Like most humans don't see one banner ad and go buy something, right? They have to see many, many ads and get reminded of it, right? Maybe depends on the kinds of product, right? So low ticket item like a can of soda, you don't really have to see too many ads before you decide, okay, I'm going to try that soda. But if it's a bigger ticket item, more expensive item, most people, modern consumers, I call them, right? They're armed with a lot of information. They're armed with, their own processes, right? They would probably check with their friends. They probably go look online, do some Google searches on that product before they buy it. So one ad does not cause one sale. So when I look at some of these attribution systems, right, a lot of it's based on clicks and based on click-throughs. They're basically claiming that these sales were caused by, these digital ads. Now there's some honesty in there, but you can't say that one ad caused one purchase. So I think some of that is really the root of the controversy where, I'm said you can't interpret the data that way. You can't extrapolate in those ways. And for a lot of the marketers, those are probably areas that they hadn't looked into before, right? And when you're doing TV advertising or maybe radio or outdoor, you didn't have that kind of data to begin with. So you used approximations to say, okay, we estimate that these sales that would have happened anyway. So it's over attributing the effectiveness of digital marketing. So part of that, is what I'm trying to encourage more marketers to look into, in a more precise manner and not just assume that the sales were driven by that. And the other part of it, as you know, is I study ad fraud, right? So there's a lot of bots that are clicking on ads and it creates the illusion of these campaigns working very well. And for many advertisers, they really just don't put in the work to really make sure that certain sales are attributable to the digital advertising that they're doing.
Yeah, some great points there. Some interesting things back up what you said that I saw when I was at Google. We saw that for the average purchase, this was actually across all consumer purchases. It actually required around 11.4, I think it was, interactions with the brand.
Yeah,
That's, ad,
multiple.
website, social, email before
That's
making a
right.
purchase. And
Yeah,
so it is a complex sales cycle. Another thing about attribution that I think marketers kill themselves about, and it's an impossible problem, right? Like
yeah,
I could have heard about, your services or your software or even your soda
yeah,
from a friend, word of mouth, and then later on Googled the brand and gone to the website, and that marketer will be like, oh, well, Google should get credit for that
yeah,
ad, when in
yeah,
fact, that was from a word of mouth,
yeah.
a word of mouth piece of
And
marketing. So,
and here's a great case study. Simple Modern basically sells mugs and different glassware and consumerware on Amazon. And what they were saying is they actually had to discover this by running a turn off experiment, right? So they turned off their ads on Amazon and saw all their sales just continue. So one of the key insights from that was that people wanted to buy the Simple Modern cups and mugs and stuff like that anyway, right? So they were already on the way to purchase. They typed in the word Simple Modern mug in the search. First thing that shows up is an ad, right? Amazon shows that ad at the top of the stack. So the consumer clicks on that and it kind of over attributes the effectiveness of the ad. They were already on the way to buying that cup. They were going to buy it anyway, but because they clicked on the ad, because of the location of it, all the metrics said, "Oh, it's the ad that caused the sale," right? So they had to find that out by running an experiment. When they paused the ads, they still got the sales, right? So
yeah, I think
those are examples of experiments that more marketers should run.
it's pretty clear in that case. I think marketers should do a better job to understand is this campaign just demand capture of demand that either I or an industry have created,
Yep,
or is it demand awareness? Am I just
correct.
bringing awareness to the problem as part of a broader mix? And I think for a long time on the internet, the only effective ads were demand capture, and that's because you were early to having an
Yeah,
e-commerce site for something that no one knew what brand to go to
yep,
online to buy from. They're
hmm
just going into search. So I think that's made online marketing a lot harder, and a lot of marketers are definitely biased to a last click model from Google search because it made them so
yep,
much money. And so that's
yeah,
the reason that model was successful for so long. And obviously, I think the world has gotten more complicated, especially for online marketing. You're too late to be first for your e-commerce store. And just like anywhere else, over time, it's just going to come down to the quality of your product, the quality of your company, the quality of your people. Do people want to buy from you versus just figuring out way to arbitrage higher in search and social and get people's attention for being first, right?
yeah. And I think we've come a full circle, right? Because in the early days of digital marketing, it was basically banner ads on Yahoo, right? So that was really about awareness. And so this was a new channel. People were coming online and spending their time looking at Yahoo and different web pages instead of reading the magazine, right? So obviously you had to show ads to them here as well. But then Google came along, right? So when Yahoo was dominant, who could have thought that anyone could displace them? But Google did, right? So Google came out with a new model based on search ads, and the ads were shown when the person was searching for something, right? And the business model changed as well because Google didn't charge unless they got the click, right? So that was an entirely new business model at the time, cost per click. So we went to that kind of more performance mindset. And for the next 10 years, we were very search oriented. But then came programmatic advertising, and then came a new crop of ad tech companies that were saying, oh, let's go back to the banner ad. Let's go back to showing ads to as many people as possible on as many sites as possible, right? They were still using the reach and frequency concept, which was very familiar to advertisers coming from TV and print, right? We wanted more reach, we wanted more frequency because we wanted to remind people with ads. And then we layer on ad targeting and all that kind of stuff. So some of the last 10 years, we've really seen the growth of a ton of data, right? For not only targeting purposes, but also the attribution that we just talked about. And a lot of it is just incorrect, right? So for the marketers who don't have a lot of experience, they'll say, oh, wow, this campaign is driving so many sales. But yet, if they actually ran a turn off experiment, they'll understand that those sales would have occurred anyway, and were not actually caused by the sales, right? They were happening at the same time, so it was coincidental. There was no cause and effect. So I think in that case, a lot of the, I'm going to call it misinformation or miseducation of marketers has led to kind of the perpetuation of the bad data, bad metrics, bad attribution.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Definitely for any SMB and small company. If you get a job as a marketer at like a small business, like run an ads off test, I think is like a no brainer, easy thing for like any junior marketer to do and see what
Yeah.
happens and start
And
start from
and they just don't
scratch.
have a lot of budget, right? So a
Yeah,
small business, if they spend $100 and they don't get any return from it, they can't even spend the next $100. So
right.
what I've been looking at, especially in my research around ad fraud, it's the largest of advertisers, right? Literally the largest advertisers on earth are the most affected by digital ad fraud because when you're a P&G and you have to spend $2 billion on digital, there's not enough real ads to buy, right? So when you have that kind of enormous budget, you're basically forcing your agency, go out and find me stuff to buy. And then that's like the bad guy's dream, right? Because now it's like, oh, let's go make up more inventory using bot traffic, right? We can spin up 10,000 more WordPress websites based on templates, and they can basically generate enough supply or inventory to absorb all that demand, right? Because the largest of advertisers have to spend that money. And I think the SMBs or small business owners who are actually looking at analytics more closely, they are less affected by it because they will immediately cut programs, right? They will immediately cut campaigns that are just not working for them, right? They're not actually driving incremental.
Yeah, I think that's directionally correct in that larger companies just have bigger checks to throw at things. And it's
Yeah.
like, do they really want to, comb through data and look at
Yeah.
campaigns, and or do they just want to, say, well, whatever, it's just a rounding error. This is the cost of doing business, quote unquote. And I do think, though, that in a post ZERP world, now that the Fed has raised rates off zero, money's no longer
Yeah.
free, that I
Yeah.
think that companies will have to take more of a machete to their
Yes.
series of tactics and not just spend ever more dollars on,
We
wherever their
Yeah, we are
marketing team says
literally
to
seeing
spend.
that right now. And so the pandemic was that external earthquake. So 2020, when that hit, people before the pandemic, everyone was just spending like crazy, right? And no one wanted to be the one who, said, "Oh, well, maybe we shouldn't be spending that much," right? Everyone was part of that party. So when the pandemic hits, now after a few years, we've seen the ripple effects, right? So a lot of marketers are saying, "Okay, we better look more closely at what we're spending." And so in my area of research in my business, I've gotten a huge uptick of advertisers coming to me for help. Let's go audit campaigns, right? They never asked me that before 2020. It's like they don't want to hear it. But now it's like, okay, we better go take a closer look to see where we can cut costs and where we can cut out fraud that's eating up large chunks of their digital marketing budgets.
So, in terms of ad fraud, you do a lot of work at this. I don't know how much you want to, or you even can share, but how widespread do you estimate it is? And I guess, what are the worst either offender channels or companies or tactics? Anything broadly? If I'm a marketer, like what are things that I might want to look at first? If I just joined a company, I'm like, I'm here to audit everything. I'm here to focus on the most effective tactics. Where do you think the most? Where do I start to find fraud?
Um, Literally whatever you're spending your money on, right? So bad guys don't discriminate. Basically, they go where the money is. So when advertisers were spending on display ads 13 years ago, that's where they went. When then the ad spending moved into mobile, that's where they went. Right? When it moved into video ads because the CPMs were much higher than display ads, that's where the bad guys went. And then most recently, we're talking about CTV ads, right? Which are ads that are supposed to run on your connected TV, but yet many of the ads are just running on plain old websites in display ad slots, right? So a lot of that kind of stuff, it's basically wherever the advertisers are trying to spend as much money as possible, that's where the bad guys go because they're literally holding out a bucket and taking all that money. So the question about how much fraud there is, no one's going to want to hear this, but you can cut out 99% of the impressions you're buying right now and still see no decline in sales. Okay, that's a very uncomfortable thing to hear. And you can cut out 90% of the dollars you're spending and still see no decline in sales. There are much, much better ways to spend your digital ad budgets to drive incremental. And I'm not even getting into the nuance of incremental sales versus just maintaining existing levels of sales, right? But a lot of people are not familiar with the concept of incremental, where these are sales that would not have occurred in the absence of the advertising. Because for the largest of advertisers, they have so many channels of advertising going on that even if you turn off digital, you're still running TV, you're still running print. So you're never actually off, right? So the person, the consumer, would have probably seen a TV ad, even if your digital is not running right now. They would have been influenced by the TV ad and then come online and do a search, just like you said before. And then they ended up clicking through to the auto website and buying something, right?
Yeah, it's a bold statement on the 90 and 99% side of things. The one area I think that um those those numbers seem very true as well. I would say on the ad side, you'll have to audit it and find out if yours are that bad or hopefully better. But on organic social, on say running a brand Facebook or brand LinkedIn page, there was a day where your posts would go to all of those followers, and all of these social networks altered the deal and they pulled the rug on the organic audiences that companies had built. And I can say it's about that bad or worse in
Yeah.
every brand
Yeah.
page. And now they want you to pay for play and, basically advertise to
Correct.
reach the community you built.
That's a different issue than fraud, though. That's where the social networks have all the power, right? And they're basically saying instead of getting the organic free traffic, you have to pay for it. So that's a different issue. Let me kind of illustrate, just using the CTV example, of just how easy it is for the bad guys to get away with the ad fraud. And that's why there's so much of it. Okay. So in CTV, most advertisers believe that their ads are actually running on your connected Samsung TV or connected, LG TV or whatever. But if you actually notice, even when you're streaming, YouTube, NFL games this last season, there were many unsold ad slots, right? The YouTube page was basically like a moment of Zen, we'll be right back or something. So literally, that's an unsold ad slot, and the same occurs on ESPN, HGTV, and Food Network and things like that. So if the channels that humans watch have unsold ad slots, what are the advertisers buying billions upon billions of quantity, right? The CTV. There's not enough humans streaming enough to generate that much quantity of CTV impressions. So what we have seen in the data is where an advertiser, they might have bought direct from Samsung, for example, but in an effort to generate more billions of impressions, even one of those players are doing what is known as audience extension. So instead of the ads actually running on a large screen connected TV, they're actually running on websites in either a video ad slot or display ad slot, right? And that to me is not CTV. And the other stuff that we've seen in, again, researching the fraud is, oh, here's a smart refrigerator or a whole bunch of smart refrigerators generating fake CTV bid requests and getting away with it. And then the most recent example is where you have JavaScript code in an ad slot generating fake CTV bid requests to the tune of 12 billion per day. So
It's
that's
incredible.
how much quantity the bad guys are generating, and they're getting away with most of it, right? Some of it is caught. So, like you can be very, very strict on your CTV buys, and you can cut out some of that. But again, most people are again just going for reach and frequency, so they're not looking very closely, and that's how the bad guys get away with the fraud.
So is I guess a little bit of blanket advice for marketers is, definitely don't just trust the programmatic gods in your
Yeah,
CTV
don't
tool.
assume. Don't
Like
assume. Yeah.
you want to pick your, you want to actually pick the content that you want to run ads against and probably
Yeah,
pay.
and we can't solve this overnight, right? Because if you're used to buying a billion CTV impressions per month, it's going to be very hard for you to go explain to your boss why 99% of it's not real and only 1% was actually real. So what I tend to recommend to the largest of advertisers, right? Once we see the data, right? If we see 90% dark red, right? In my charts, it's dark red, it means fraud. I said, don't panic. Don't worry about that. The point is, we now have the proper analytics so that we can see where the fraud is coming from and how much fraud is actually impacting your campaigns. Because one of the other large assumptions that these advertisers have is that, oh, yeah, we've heard about ad fraud, but it's out there. It's someone else's problem. It doesn't affect us. Okay. They haven't had the right tools, right? So if you think about the legacy fraud verification vendors, they've been reporting 1% fraud for the last 8 years straight. It's not because it's 1% fraud. The 1% is all the fraud they can catch, not all the fraud there is. Okay, so just let that sink in for a minute, right? The 1% that they report is all the fraud they can catch, not all the fraud there is. So there's way more fraud, not only in the ecosystem, but also impacting your campaigns. So by having better analytics and better tools and just looking more closely, right, you can actually say, okay, something's wrong here. We got to do something about it. But even if it's like a scary number, like 90%, the point is we need to put a transition plan in place, right? So a marketer can't go to the CFO and say, whoops, for the last 3 years, we've been blowing 90% of the budgets on fraud. We didn't know it. Okay. What we can do now with better analytics is what I'm going to call progressively clean the fraud, right? So every week, every 2 weeks, we go in and take out the top 10 bad guys, right? Simply by adding those bad sites and bad apps to a block list. So then you just progressively clean it because then you'll have a more smooth transition, right? Because of the fraud, we've seen CPMs are far, far lower than they're supposed to be, right? There's no way you can be buying ads on a good publisher and be paying 30-cent CPMs, right? No good publisher can sell you ads for that, especially on CTV, for example, right? And you're not going to be getting that kind of quantity, right? You're not going to get tens of billions of impressions to buy because there's just not enough humans on earth to generate that much quantity. Okay. So over the years, we've seen much lower, artificially low CPMs across all ad types. We've seen artificially high quantities across all ad types due to the bot activity and due to fraudulent activity. And we've also seen artificially high click-through rates, right? Which a lot of people say, oh, that's performance, all that kind of stuff. So we can't overnight solve the fraud problem. Otherwise, our CPMs will go 10x what it is right now. Our click-through rates would drop through the floor, right? And then the quantities that we want to buy just won't be there. So I think for the largest of advertisers, if they see a fraud problem, because now they have better tools to see it, by progressively cleaning it, they can set their own timeline, right? Some advertisers will be extremely aggressive and want to clean that up in 6 to 12 months. Other advertisers will say, okay, we can't really clean it this quickly, right? We may have to schedule it for an 18-month process or 24-month process to clean these campaigns. So it's really up to the advertiser. They can choose their own pace and they can use the data, right? Use the analytic to say, okay, let's take out the most egregious bad guys first. We can't solve the whole fraud problem overnight.
So I want to talk about Fou Analytics in just 1 second because I feel like you have
Hmm.
tools to help do this. But
Yeah.
before, Yasa, just to riff on what you were saying, it appears to me that a lot of publishers who have high quality premium audiences are probably doing themselves a disservice to in how they're packaging selling ads on large networks. Like it seems to me, if you're making a case that look, a lot of the ads online are bad, if you have a high quality site with lots of high intent traffic, I think you're almost making a case that they should charge a premium and maybe not even be a part of an ad network.
Yes, and you know what happened to them over the last 10 years is I'm going to actually put the blame squarely on the fraud verification companies. Okay, the legacy fraud verification companies. I'm not going to say their name, but you know who they are. There's two public ones. Okay, so the reason for that is they marked the good publishers at 1% IVT, invalid traffic, and they also marked the 100% fraudulent sites as 1% IVT. Okay, so if you're an ad buyer and you said, "Oh, well, here's, a good publisher that is 1% invalid traffic and I'm paying $35. And over here, I get $3 CPMs and it's also 1% invalid traffic. Why wouldn't I buy the cheaper thing?" You see what I'm saying? So because of the legacy fraud verification companies' failure to detect the bots and the fraud, they basically put the good publishers in the same bucket as the bad publishers, right? No one can tell the difference because everything looked like 1% invalid traffic. So that's what's happened in the last 10 years. And so the ad buyers were shifting their dollars away from these premium publishers, chasing lower and lower and lower CPMs. Okay. The way to turn this around is to not just focus on the fraud part of it, right? The 1% IVT. The 1% invalid traffic on the legitimate publishers is real because they have some level of bots that come to their sites, right? Search crawlers and other legitimate bots, right? Good bots or whatever. They do come to their site. Any public web page can be hit by any bot at any time, right? So as long as you have a public web page, you're subject to bots coming to your page. But the difference is the big mainstream publishers don't go out and buy a rampant amount of traffic, right? Some do because they couldn't resist the temptation, but some of the mainstream publishers don't go out and buy a whole bunch of traffic, right? So in that case, um, we can focus on humans, right, or a percentage of confirmed humans, right? This kind of gets to what I do, which is the Fou Analytics platform. We have both dark blue, which is humans, and dark red, which is bots. So if we only focus on the IVT, you can kind of like put the bad publishers are put in the same bucket as the good publishers. But if you start focusing on the human audiences, the good publishers will have 60, 80, 90% dark blue on their sites, whereas the bad publishers will have none. Okay, so what I've started talking about with the advertisers is instead of optimizing away from the fraud and bots, let's think about optimizing towards the human audiences. And once you start doing that, then you'll say, oh, well, these real publishers actually have real human audiences. so we can afford to pay higher CPMs, right? We're not just chasing as low CPM as possible, right? So that kind of gets us out of that rut that we've been in for the last 10 years.
Awesome. That's super helpful. I think really articulate. So, can you give us the spiel on Fou Analytics? Is it a SaaS product? Is it a service? What is it for those who don't know?
Yeah, it's like an analytics platform, and the best analogy to it or for it is Google Analytics Enterprise, right? So obviously, there's a free version, right? When I started out 15 years ago, measuring my own websites, I was using GA because I couldn't afford, the expensive Omniture, Web Trends, and that kind of stuff. So it was a free product you put on your own website. So ours is as well. So I leave Foo Analytics free for small and medium businesses. So any website that has under 1 million page views per month can use it for free, self-serve. For large advertisers, it's kind of like an annual contract, annual subscription. So in that sense, it's like Microsoft Office. You have so many employees that need PowerPoint, Excel, and Word, so you just pay an annual subscription for it, right? So Foo Analytics is kind of like a SaaS platform, analytics platform that you can add not only to your websites, so you can check the traffic coming to it, but you can also tag the ads themselves. And usually that's like 1,000 times the quantity, when you talk about numbers of impressions. And when you put the tag in your ads, you can then see where the ads go and whether they were loaded, those ads were loaded by bots or other forms of fraud. So that's
Awesome.
basically it. And it kind of grew out of a set of tools that I started building for myself about 12 years ago. So when I left Omnicom, I was still serving a lot of pharmaceutical clients, and we were seeing very strange things in the data, like 200% click-through rates, and even clicks coming after the campaign was over. We turned off the campaign, we're still getting clicks. Okay, so it's like started asking around, what the heck are these, right? Who's still clicking on the ads when we're not even running any ads? Turns out it's the bots that basically captured the click-through URL and just kept replaying them, right? So just like bots can easily load web pages, they can easily load those click-through URLs complete with the UTM source equals this, UTM campaign equals that, right? So we kept seeing those, and nobody could really explain what that was. And GA obviously could not explain, right? They didn't give those kind of details. So started building a set of tools for myself. And initially, they were used on websites, namely pharmaceutical clients' websites, to say, okay, well, what are these clicks coming to the page? Long story short, they were obviously bots. And back then, bots were very simple, right? They were just headless Chrome browsers, or what we call automation tools, right? Developers use them to test their web pages. So you could just instruct one of these browsers or an army of these browsers, headless Chrome browsers, to just repeatedly load web pages. And that's what bots were back then, right? They're much more advanced now. But back then, all they had to do was cause pages to load and therefore generate ad impressions out of thin air. So that was the genesis of it. And initially, I just built these tools for myself so that I could help advertisers audit their campaigns. And I would simply deliver the recommendations and observations through PowerPoint. I would screenshot from the dashboard and assemble a PowerPoint just like I did at McKinsey and say, here are the things we recommend you turn off and optimize your campaign. But by 2020, I was running out of my own time, so I couldn't take on more consulting work, right? So I said, I better open up the platform so that others can use it, just like they use GA for or Adobe Analytics for their websites. You can't use those for ads. So basically, Foo Analytics would be equivalent of analytics for your ads. So just gave it a name, gave it the name Foo Analytics, created user accounts, and that's when we started opening up the platform to others to use. So now we have tens of thousands of small websites using it for their analytics, and it's usually used side by side with GA because it helps you troubleshoot some of the discrepancies, right? So you may have like a big chunk of traffic that you say, "What the heck is this?" Right? The GA can't tell you. So if you have Foo Analytics next to your Google Analytics, you can use it to troubleshoot and figure out, oh, it's these bots that basically GA just doesn't show you, right? Or it excludes from the display. And then on top of that, for some of the larger advertisers, we're now running annual contracts where they're tagging the tens of billions of impressions that they're buying. And they're in having that data, they can now better monitor and manage their own campaigns, right? That's where we go into like, let's clean out the bad guys first, right? The most egregious bad guys first. So it kind of grew into this. It wasn't like premeditated that I'm creating a platform. It was just a set of tools for me to use to audit campaigns. But now, it's so mature. and others are using it, they're becoming part of that solution as well.
Awesome. And then that leads into my next question. So I haven't actually worked on analytics in a number of years, but I'm curious. You talk with a lot of analytics and data science teams. Can you share for people listening who are, they're looking to build out their analytics team, or maybe, even bring in their first data science guys to work with marketing? What are your sort of favorite attributes to look for in a hire on this team? Like, what do you look for that's, hey, this person's going to make a really good addition to my marketing team?
It's very simple. It's like I want to see their eyes light up when they see data, right? That is it. Because, if you don't like to look at data, you're not going to be a good analytics person. But I can actually tell within 5 seconds who's going to be a good analytics person. And it's really a lot of what I'm going to call transferable skills. So if you're used to looking at Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics, this is just one more set of data for you to look at, right? And the same methodologies or the way you go through the analytics to really understand what you're looking at apply, right? So it's not like it's going to be a completely new thing. I'll give you one example. We saw a website, we were monitoring a website, and then, over the course of a couple of days, we saw the dark red basically triple, right? So we see a huge surge in bots coming to the site. So the question is, okay, we looked at the data and we confirmed these are all bots. These are not even disguised, right? It was all coming from Amazon Cloud, Google Cloud, different data centers. So it was 100% confirmed, easy to see that they were all bots. But the question was, it was a business question. Do we have to do anything about it, right? Is this affecting our campaigns? So an analytics person would then go in there and say, oh, well, let's look at these specific bot visits, right? We isolate just the bot visits and we look for refer, right? So did it come from a paid campaign? And we also look at the URL itself to see, did it contain UTM source equals this, UTM campaign equals that? Fortunately, there was no referrer, which means that the bots just loaded the page directly, and there was no UTM source or UTM campaign in the URLs, which told us again they were just loading the bare pages, right? There were no query strings and things like that. So in that case, after we looked at the data, we said, oh, okay, now we understand these are 100% bots, right? It's increasing the load on our site, but we don't have to do anything about it because they were not clicking through on our ads and costing us money, like cost per click or things like that. So that's an example of where, it's not just a kind of a scientific thing. You have to really understand the business context of it to understand whether the surge in bots is a good thing or a bad thing that you have to take action on, right? So I would just encourage people who have some kind of analytics background, meaning they've looked at GA or Adobe Analytics. Those are the perfect people to continue and start studying the analytics for the digital ads themselves and see how whether fraud has been affecting their campaigns.
Awesome. I used to, when I was talking to data science teams at some of the large Vegas hotels. First of all, they were some of the most sophisticated teams with data I've
Yeah,
ever seen. Like, they know price elasticity of
yeah,
table games at time of day on the floor. It's unreal.
yes,
Um they typically they would hire like ex, big pharma people who had worked on cohort analysis and labs and wanted
yes,
to, try something else. They would hire sometimes ex Wall Street guys who, were whip sharp with Excel, and you could help train them on digital analytics, because it's not really entirely different looking at, company metrics or, digital analytics. So I like that. I also found, at least when I was at Google, the 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 nerd who had built like an app or a blog in their free time
yeah,
was a lot better at this than, maybe the person who's super buttoned down and had the MBA and like was a little bit,
yeah.
I guess a little less
Nerdy.
ambitious to just break
Yeah.
stuff. Yes, nerdy. You said it.
Let me tell you, it's way simpler than that. And I'll add in an encouraging word. Any small business owner can do this, even if you don't have a math degree, even if you don't have a science degree, analytics degree, or anything. It is really about how vigilant you are with your own, spending and your own website and things like that. So we don't need quants. We don't need data scientists. It is way simpler than that, right? So like kind of the example I just said, when we saw the surge in bots, we could just look at some supporting data. Yeah, they were all Amazon data centers. They were literally the same exact screen resolution over and over again, right? Most humans have different screen resolutions. They have different browsers. We shouldn't be seeing the exact same browser, the exact same screen resolution, in 99% of the visits. Okay. So some of that is common sense. And one other very important thing is to really understand the context, the business context, okay, and understand how the campaign was set up. So I'm going to give you an example where we literally went back and just studied some of the campaign setup and understood what was happening. Okay. So if we saw Breitbart.com in the output, right, which is where we measured with a JavaScript tag that the ad actually ended up on Breitbart.com. The next question is that a problem or not? If the campaign setup meant if the campaign setup did not have Breitbart.com in the block list, it is not a problem. That's the way the campaign was supposed to run. But if the campaign setup did have Breitbart.com in the block list, but yet we still saw ads going to Breitbart.com, something went wrong in there, right? Either somebody didn't enforce the block list for you, or there was some other supply chain leakage. Okay, I'm just using that as a kind of a layperson example to say this is not about log level data. This does not require data scientists for you to study and figure out. Okay, that's an example where you can actually just track back to the campaign setup to say, are the outcomes consistent with the way I set up my campaign? Right? Did you set up pacing? Did you set up did you turn off the overnight hours? Right? The data should actually say, this is how it came out. The other thing is, even with data scientists, they still misinterpret the data if they don't understand the business context or if they don't understand how the ad tech works. So there's been two cases where the fraud verification company, the legacy fraud verification company, had data scientists, right? I'll mention the first one, SportsBot. They said, wow, we see billions upon billions of bid requests going to sports sites like NFL.com, DallasCowboys.com, MLB, all these major sports sites. So they sent out a press release. We discovered this huge botnet that's affecting all of these sports sites. Okay, that was a data scientist. None of it occurred because I was measuring on the big sports sites at the time, several of them. There was no botnet on any of those sites. So the data scientists correctly identified billions upon billions of fraudulent bid requests that declared those domains, right? These sporting domains. But because they didn't understand how bots worked and how ad tech worked, they misinterpreted it to say, oh, there must have been a botnet going to those sites. It was basically bid requests generated by Python scripts on servers. Okay, so there was no botnet. Okay, so that was one example. The second example is simpler. It's called 404 bot. And basically, when they checked the URLs, they said they came up with a 404 error, which meant page doesn't exist. So what the bad guys were doing is basically in the bid request, not only were they specifying the domain, they were also making up a page, a URL, right? marthastewart.com cookie recipes or something, right? When you actually check that URL, you get a 404 error because that page did not exist. So again, the data scientists correctly identified a form of fraud, but because they didn't understand how the ad tech worked, they thought it was a bot, right? So again, that was a misinterpretation of the data. So that's a very long way of saying that you can have data scientists, those are great, but they really have to understand the business context as well as ad tech to then properly detect whether something is a problem or not. And too few of the data scientists that work at the legacy fraud verification companies are actually reviewing campaign data with their clients, right? They're kind of in the back room, they're tuning the algorithms. But I can tell you, I've been tuning my algorithms for 12 years. There are many, many exceptions based on the context of the campaign that you won't know unless you actually talk to the client.
I love what you said. My old boss, Justin Catroni, I'm sure you know him. He used to work at Cardinal Path. He was my boss at Google. Used to say that great analytics pros have business acumen, which is
Yes,
exactly what you said. And
yes,
you can't just you can't. It's more than just understanding p values, and it's more than just
yes.
understanding how to build a segment and run an A/B test. You actually have
Yeah,
to
and data
understand.
in isolation, right? You can't interpret it without the proper context. So it kind of allows me to say and kind of encourage small business owners, okay, don't worry if you don't have a science degree. Don't worry if you don't have a math degree. Just start looking at the data. And basically what I've done is I've actually looked at Google Analytics for my own website since the beginning. I've actually run Facebook campaigns, I've run YouTube campaigns, I've run LinkedIn campaigns, and I've measured it. So I've learned by doing. So I want to encourage more small business owners to do that, and hopefully more large marketers to actually roll up their sleeves and look at the analytics themselves and not just blindly trust what their agency's telling them.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I've tested all of the ad tools from everything from back in the day when Reddit first let me run
Yeah,
ads. I was like one of the first people in there
yeah,
cuz it was cool to try, and I think that's something I look for in my teams is have
yeah,
you just tried stuff? Have you tinkered? Have you,
yes.
launched something? Have you on your own, gone through the steps yourself? And I
Yeah,
think going
take
through
kind of
that
an experimental mindset, right? Run the experiment, right? Even with $100, just run the experiment because then you
to-
can actually learn by doing. And so I
totally.
think that's the most powerful, right? There's no books written about this stuff, right? There are some now, but it's like a lot of the stuff we learned on the fly. And the only way to learn it was by actually doing them. And so I think some of the larger or the marketers at the larger companies really need to get more into the nitty gritty of things. And I think they will do better marketing because of that.
I think so too. So I learn a lot from you online. Where can our listeners find you to read more of your thoughts and learn about your product and connect?
Most of my stuff is on LinkedIn now. So I used to do the SEO stuff, put it on my own blog, and then put keywords in and all that. But I post to LinkedIn. So just find me on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter for Fou Analytics practitioners. And a lot of that's based on just literally the charts, right? So when I'm reviewing a campaign, when I'm looking at data with the clients, if I see a phenomenon, right? So the one I posted recently was where we see tiny little variations on the window size. Okay, we see like the bots are actually tweaking the window size by 1 pixel each time. And so we see lots of that. I post those as examples because it's based on actual data that I'm looking at, right? So it's not just an opinion, it's not just me dreaming up stuff. It's like these are from real campaigns that we're looking at. So I think if people really want to get into that, they can find me on LinkedIn, look at some of the past articles. There's a lot of screenshots of the platform in there, and they're always welcome to just DM me and happy to answer their questions.
Great. Well, we'll put some links in the video description on YouTube. And thank you all for listening. Again, please like, comment, or subscribe. We appreciate all your engagement, and we will talk to you next week.
Thanks for having me.